Hi, my name is Mackenzie Holston. I teach in Rochester, New York. I teach at the high school level, and I'm currently teaching Foundations of Geometry and Algebra.
I am William Harnica. I teach at the high school level in Okemos, Michigan. This year I have Studies in Algebra, which is a lower tracked Algebra 1 course. I have Intro to Algebra 2, which is a lower tracked Algebra 2 course. And then I have regular on track geometry.
Hi, everyone. My name is Caitlin Benson. I teach at the high school level in Madison Heights, Michigan. I teach regular tracked Algebra 2, Honors Algebra 2, Pre-Calculus, and Calculus.
And I am Dana Schraben. I teach in Detroit at the high school level, and I teach Algebra 1 and Algebra 2, both just regular classes.
So I'm going to get the book club discussion started with one of the passages that kind of stood out to me. So the passage is on page 62, and it's the first passage. And just to kind of summarize what it's about, it was talking about the IRE pattern, which means that a teacher initiates a question, the student responds in like one or two words, and then the teacher evaluates the student's response as either right or wrong. So that kind of stood out to me because I personally have like a difficult time with questioning techniques. And I find myself usually using like basic level or like low level questioning. Although I would like to try to ask deeper level questions, I feel like I'm kind of just in this like process where the things that come to mind to me are just like asking basic questions where students respond to them. And I'll be like, okay, yeah, that was right or that was wrong. So that kind of just stood out to me as like something that I can relate to. So I didn't know if you guys also related to that or if you had any input on that kind of questioning technique.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think like questioning is really important, and obviously like trying to make it so it's an open-ended question so that they have room for debate kind of is obviously something that I try to incorporate in. I know like in my geometry class, if I ask them a question and like say talk in your groups about it and it's a poor question, like they talk because I asked them to, but then like that's all the conversation is. They just basically check in answer wise. Whereas if the question is open-ended and has a lot of moving pieces to it and there is room for debate, like their conversation could easily take 5 to 10 minutes without even me prompting further. So I know like just the way I word a question or what I'm asking about, I mean, it totally changes the dynamics of how they talk with each other in their groups. And that's not me doing anything different other than just giving them a different question to start with. So obviously questions have a huge importance to it, but going back to what you said, like how do we know what questions are the right questions to ask?
Yeah, and what I was going to say is a lot of times I find myself falling into that just to make sure that students understand, I guess, what it is that I'm asking them to do, or just to kind of probe them for what they're about to move into. But I think what happens for me sometimes too is that they are stopped with what they can answer in terms of like explaining. And I think it's just a matter of simple reframings of the way that we ask questions. Instead of do you have any questions, it can be what questions do you have, and just those little switches kind of prompt more discussion. But I do the same thing where it's like, what's the answer? 5. Good, let's keep going. And then didn't do anything, right? So the chapter or the part that follows it that I kind of linked to that helped me maybe consider some other things were the frameworks that we can use to kind of hold students accountable for the way that they're talking. And that was the revoicing, the asking students to restate somebody else's reasoning, asking them to apply their own reasoning, and then using wait time, I think, is the biggest thing. Because like I was saying, I was watching myself teach before this, and it would be I'd ask a question, I'd wait 2 seconds, and it felt like to me 10 seconds, and I'd be like,
right.
Why aren't you answering? But it was only
it feels a lot longer
really.
than it is, and that's something that I also struggle with is wait time, like making sure they have enough time to answer before I like jump back in.
And I guess for me, I also struggle with that, with trying to think about how to like phrase questions so that way my kids don't just like give up with even thinking about it.
Mhm.
So like I could try to ask a direct question. Wait time is like pretty okay, and then they're just looking at me like, what? And then it's like, okay, well, how can I like try to re-say this on the spot? And then they're still looking at me like, what? And they get very frustrated with me if I do try to widen their thinking about things. They're like, Benson, just give me the answer. What are you talking about? Give me the answer. Give me the answer. And I'm like, no, I'm trying to help you to think and, just take a little bit further. No, give me the answer. So I think trying to get them to be comfortable with like me asking them questions and then them asking each other questions is kind of where at least I think I'm at with my classroom or with my classes. And I know for me, it works out a little bit better with the higher level classes than with like my algebra class, because they're not used to being asked questions like that. Where at least in my higher level classes, they know that they rely upon each other a lot. So if I'm asking a question, they can like kind of go back amongst each other, try to figure it out, and then be like, oh, okay, that makes sense, yada, yada, yada. So it's interesting. But I definitely understand where everybody's coming from with their questioning.
So, like going off of the things that we had about questioning and what Will said about like having those questions like kind of already thought out, like what are the right questions to ask. That's like also something that I've been working on this year, is trying to like think of the questions that I want to ask ahead of time, because when you're doing it on the spot, that's when like I feel like that's when the basic level questions come out. Like I'm not going to have like a really good question like on the spot that I just like thought of randomly. It kind of has to be like planned out. So that kind of goes with the like anticipating, almost like you're anticipating what you want like students to get out of it, so you have to like prepare in like the lesson planning like what type of questions that you want to ask and what you anticipate like student responses are going to be from those questions, and if that's like the intended learning that you had for like a particular lesson.
Right.
That's the section that like I still have questions about and is challenging for me, because like I mean I understand like I can make what I would expect are student mistakes, but ultimately like students are like, some students have like insanely unique ways of thinking about things.
It's a good way to phrase
In a
it.
million years would I be able to anticipate what they're about to tell me? And
Right.
like I can anticipate a lot of things, but there's just some that I can't.
Mm-hmm.
Those things come up and I'm just like, that's completely wrong, but it's a good thought. Like it's good that your gears are turning, and I just don't know how to like positively tell the kid like you're wrong. Like I want to talk about it, but like it's just so off topic, or it's just not even in the realm of like being on the correct path. I don't know how to like turn that positive thing of that person sharing an idea and like taking a leap and turn it into a positive of, hey, you took a chance, but like, you failed. So I don't know how to make it a positive situation.
You failed.
You know what I mean? The kids that like you.
Yeah, they're really excited about their answer, and you're like, okay. However,
Right.
like when is it worth it to like bring
Yeah.
it up as a whole class discussion, or when is it not worth it? Because like I mean everyone's like pressed for time on how much time you have in a lesson.
Mm-hmm.
Is it even worth it to bring up? Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not, and like how do you even know the difference between when it's a good time or a bad time?
Right. When you're asking a kid to solve for the value of X or something, and they give you something back that's not even a number, it's just like, I didn't anticipate you were going to answer me with another letter. Like that wasn't in my anticipated options that I listed out prior to class. It's just like you said, like how do you respond to that so that the kid still is confident enough to share again in the future, so you don't shut them down.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that has to do with like choosing which directions you want the discussion to go, but also it has to do a lot with like the norm building inside of your classroom, where I find myself, in order to push the lesson goal along, I find myself at the end of like whatever amount of time we have, grabbing papers and having kids share that only have correct answers
Yeah.
or are working towards correct answers, which sometimes can be good in pushing their thinking, but then I'm not validating that making mistakes or valuing that wrong solutions help us get to the right solutions. And I don't know how to balance that of like, anytime somebody presents and they're wrong, they feel dumb
Mm.
and not validated, but they should. And I don't know how to skew that to make it be like anybody should present even if they think that they're wrong. And that's not an overnight thing, but I'm struggling with that because I want to keep going towards the goal of the lesson. And I don't know necessarily how to best do that without showing kids that are in progression towards reaching what they should to push everybody else forward.
So like something that I do, and actually we just did it the other day in geometry. We just started like algebraic and geometric proofs, like formally writing them up, and I gave each group a complicated proof problem, like far above that what I would expect them to do individually, because they were in groups of 4, and their goal was to take 20 minutes to write up their most detailed, organized proof possible, and then the groups presented. And like I normally would sequence, but I didn't sequence at all. Like I just had groups volunteer and come up, and nor did I give any feedback to any of the groups prior to them presenting. So nobody had any idea if they were right or wrong. But when they presented, like if it was right, like, the class just gave them positive feedback. And if something was wrong, like we fixed it as a class, and the person that was presenting it just like made the suggestions that the class suggested to them on the document camera. So it was kind of like fixing it as a class together and dissecting it. And they were okay with that. Like they were going into this thing knowing that these were very tough problems and then I didn't look over any of them. They were just kind of on the same page that we're going to make mistakes. So that was just nice to see them like not have a fear of presenting something
That they knew wasn't
that
right.
they knew was probably going to be wrong, or something was going to be wrong in it.
Yeah.
But when I sequence kids like you're talking about, I always just pick the kids that do it right. So when something is wrong and I've picked you, like now they might feel embarrassed because like I called them out, or like, I'm emphasizing that you made a mistake. And it's hard to sequence realistically without like having kids think you're trying to intentionally sabotage them in front of their peers.
But I think with sequencing too, you often I guess sometimes you run into a case scenario where there might be a common mistake that the students are making though too. Like
Right.
I think when we consider sequencing, we have to consider all of the possibilities. Because I like your suggestion, and I was actually going to say too that even if a student did do something wrong, or if you're kind of like don't know, don't want to reject you, you can always just pose it as I like what you did here, like let's expound upon this. Or if you do have a presentation with the class, hey, because we're all presenting our work, let's see how we can get this to be XYZ. And then that can lead into potentially the next problem or next task that another student or a group of students might have done. So that way it's not like, oh, you're just the wrong one, but we can like fix it as a class. So that way we're not just pointing at you, to where it goes to that next the next thing.
So a question for you guys is, so say when you do sequence or select students or groups, I always identify like whose it is, because I want to let the people know like whose work we're looking at. Do you think if you did if you selected and sequenced stuff like anonymously, do you think that would like more kids would be willing to have their stuff presented and not worry about being wrong because nobody would know who's wrong?
I think it kind of depends. Like Usually when I'm selecting work to present on like the document camera, I'll ask them first and I'll be like, are you okay with me presenting this on the document camera? And they'll usually say like, yeah, that's fine. I usually like at first, like I'll kind of push their name up to the top so that it's not seen. So I just kind of say like, let's examine this student's work, and I won't say it, right off the bat. I feel like it just depends on the student if they're comfortable or not. Some students I think would rather have it so that their name is not on it. But other students are like, I've had students be like, oh no, I don't care. Like, yeah, that's fine. That's my work. You can present it. So I feel like sometimes it just depends on like how comfortable the student is. But I guess just like asking them right off the bat if they're comfortable with you sharing their work specifically and whether or not they care if their name is on it.
Yeah, I think that comes down to more so like which isn't in this book at all, really, but it's very ingrained in it, is like a status within the classroom thing, both socially and academically, in terms of what they see or what they are afraid other people are going to see if their work is attached to them, depending. Obviously, if you ask them to present, everyone's going to know whose it is, and that I think is even its own thing. Because I was thinking about that too. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was also going to say, but even if you do it anonymously, depending on what it is and how like the culture of your students are, like it could end up being really bad.
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh, I know that that's me that we're like criticizing, and depending on how the student feels and depending on how the rest of the students react to it, you get into a kind of a funny territory too. So I guess the best situation would probably be just to ask and say, hey, would you mind?
Yeah. I was thinking about too, in terms of just validating students and all of that. I have very different reactions if I take student work up to the document camera and sequence it and ask them what they think, as opposed to when I ask students to take their work up physically and place it under. Because I didn't know what to do with this. And I was like, okay, you guys, for real. But somebody presented this like big, long problem, explained everything, all this stuff, and the kids didn't understand what the kids said. But instead of asking him, they just clapped. And then after he went and sat down, I was like, questions, whatever. They said no. And then he sat down. They're like, can you explain it now? And I was like,
confused.
He just did. I mean, what? Why was that different than anything that we've? And I was like, well, if you had questions, that was your opportunity to ask. So
yeah, it's hard
here we are.
To ask or like give feedback to each other. Like they're more than happy to, ask you questions or like, the infamous question, like, is this right? But they won't ask that to somebody else. They don't, if it's not right, they don't want to be wrong in front of their peers.
Right.
And it goes all back to the culture and the mindset and all that other stuff that we try so hard to get into our classrooms.
Yeah, like another thing, because this whole book is about like mathematical discussions and putting the students at the center so that they can ask each other questions. And it's not just like us asking the questions. And this is like probably one of the biggest things that I struggle with like every year, is having students actually talk to each other about the math and ask each other questions, not you. Because I was in my class today, and just like within a span of like probably 15 seconds at one time in the period, I had people being like, Miss Holston, like just like ping ponging back and forth, like just asking me to come over. And I'm like, you have 4 people in your group. Like someone in your group should probably know what you're supposed to be doing right now. But it's so hard for me to like say that and just like pull back, because I feel like when they call my name, my automatic response is to just go to them. But that's like what I'm trying to get away from, is trying to get them to rely on each other so that I'm not like just being tossed around the room for like the only source of knowledge in the classroom.
Yeah, I struggle with that too sometimes, where especially when they're presenting their work, they don't want to ask questions about what was said. They just passively listen, and then they're like, great, we clap now, because they're done talking. And then they say, we don't have any questions. Then I say, great. If I gave you a pop quiz right now on what they just said, would you pass? And they're like, no. And I'm like, then you don't understand what they just said. And you should ask some questions. But I don't know. In terms of like making sure they're on task, one of my colleagues did a thing last week where he presented a task and then he took away all of their pencils. And then he said, for 5 minutes, I want you to talk about how you're going to approach this. And then they did. And then he gave them back their pencils and he said, I want you to write up your plan for how you're going to approach this problem. And then once you have the plan, I'll give you the resources and the materials. So he made them like physically plan it out first. And then he didn't have to explain anything. And now he's been doing that for every single task. And now he's slowly taking that away where he's like, okay, now you have your pencils and you can talk about it and do your plan. And then he said eventually he's just going to say, take away the plan and now you just go into it. So he's like scaffolding that understanding for them of what even we're supposed to be doing, which I thought was kind of cool.
Yeah, I'm just like trying to think about like the best like experience I've had with like mathematical conversations. And I feel like the best tasks so far for me, at least just in geometry, that students have like worked really well in groups together is like more like hands-on tasks, like something that's like physically involved and they can use manipulatives or something like that. I feel like those have been like the best conversations with students because they've had something to actually do. I feel like it's very hard for them when you just have like a task on paper or something and it like doesn't involve anything hands-on, that they just have to like look at each other and talk about it. And I feel like a lot of students are uncomfortable doing that. But when you have something that you can use hands-on, like whether it be like, I don't know, like algebra tiles or just like something hands-on where they can do it in a group, that it makes it like they're more open to either like show each other like what to do or something. Cause I know a lot of kids are like uncomfortable like verbally speaking in groups, but if they could show like something other than just using words, that some of my students have been like more comfortable doing that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a group in one of my geometry classes. You mentioned like they're uncomfortable, like they don't like talk to each other unless I am literally kneeling next to their group. And if I leave, like they go silent and they just stare awkwardly at each other. I'm just like, you guys are facing each other. They're all great students. They know what to do. It's not because they don't know what to do. They just don't like to communicate. And it's so hard to like break that. Like I literally have to like walk them through on how to have a conversation. And it just is like you guys wouldn't even talk about what you're doing after school today if I wasn't here, let alone talk about, how to set up a geometric proof. So
yeah.
Just crazy.
I've taken kids' pencils away and been like, I'll give these back to you when you've had a discussion about math or anything. So you let me know what you talked about, and then I'll give you your pencil back.
I didn't physically, like you said, your colleague took all their pencils away. I didn't physically take their pencils, but if somebody picked up their pencil to start writing, like I was like put it down, like I got on them, and like they just talked it out and set up that plan, like you mentioned, and like that was nice. But then I feel like I'm forcing it, and I want to like choose to conversate with one another, not me like eliminate the use of a writing utensil.
Be friends.
No.
Yeah.
I know. I feel like we all probably have some students that like, I have some students who will like absolutely refuse to work in groups. And like, they say that they 100% would much rather work by themselves than work in groups. And like some of these students I have IEPs that say that they, like they really would like to work by themselves. So I let that happen. But then I'm just like torn between this like area of like accommodating their IEP because they want to work alone. But then like, I don't want them to miss out on like the conversations that are being had in like a group setting. Because I feel like they're not getting as much of a understanding just like on their own rather than talking it out with other people. But I also like, I don't want to force anything that's like too uncomfortable for them. But like other students, like if I make them work in a group, like I've had students like storm out of the room, like put their head down, just like totally disengage. from like working in a group, and it's just like what Will said, like you don't want to force them to, but you're just like trying to help them, but you don't want to force them into anything that's like gonna make them shut down, I guess.
So, I mean, do you guys want to move on with, I mean, we were kind of just jumping around a little bit, but just to kind of spark another conversation, do you want to talk about another question that's on the protocol?
Sure. Does anyone have any question that's sparking their interest?
I mean, I am interested in knowing what you guys are doing for number 5, just to kind of bounce ideas off of each other. So it says, what are you thinking about doing for your teaching project for this class? Do you guys have something like set in stone or ideas?
Are we like for our teaching project, is it supposed to be something, it could just be something in general, it doesn't have to be like specific to this book, or are we doing something that's based off this book?
From my understanding, I think you have to try to connect it to the book.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I really want to focus on the types of questions that kids are asking each other. Specifically when I'm not involved in the conversation. Is it more like, what did you get? Can I see your paper type communication? Or is it, how do you know that? Can you explain that? Like, what types of questions are they asking? And then kind of taking those and recording their conversations and seeing what patterns surface from who's doing the most talking, and kind of mapping their discussions just amongst maybe like one focus group in one of my classes, just to follow if I can see and progress them somehow towards more high level questioning things. That's what I'm thinking about. I don't know how it's all going to work, but that would be my ideal.
I like that.
Probably do a chalk talk for that or something.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking would be a good space to do that. And then maybe throw in like, here's the types of questions that we want to be asking one another. Let's practice that.
Mm-hmm.
You know what is a really cool activity to help them like start asking questions is to give them a problem and like not all the necessary information. So like, for example, like in geometry for vectors, like I just show them a video of a guy walking in an airport, and then he goes from walking on the ground to walking on one of the moving runways. And I just asked the question, like, what is his speed when he's on the runway? But in order to know that, like, they have to know, like, what was his original speed? What was the speed of the runway? You know, are they going the same direction, or is he going in opposite direction as the runway's moving? And, like, I don't give them any of that information. Like, I make them, like, think, like, to ask that to each other. And then if they ask that question to each other, and, like, then they can ask it to me from the group, and then I'll give them the information. So I basically make them, like, seek out the information. I don't know.
When they ask the question, you give them.
Yeah, I feel like it helps them make like sense of their questions. Like it makes their questions seem valuable. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I like that.
So I like wrote down some notes about what like I thought I wanted to do. I mean, obviously based off this book, like the whole idea is student discussions. So that's like what I wanted to focus it on. So I also wanted to work on students talking with each other. So I think, Dana, like to go off of yours, I also want them to ask each other questions. And in addition to them asking each other questions, I want to kind of like amp up the types of questions that I'm asking them so that they're more like open-ended and more able to be discussed like among a group instead of just like a straightforward answer. And that's like something that I wanted to work on last year as well, but I didn't like get there by the end of the year. So I think my focus is definitely going to be on like questioning, and not only just like my questioning, but like you said, like questions between students and how to get students comfortable with asking each other questions and like being vulnerable and not like, or I guess just like taking more risks in groups.
Mine's kind of similar to yours, Mackenzie. You mentioned like them taking risk and like being vulnerable and stuff. I want to focus on how are my classroom norms affecting the ability for students to have discussions with each other. Because if they don't feel comfortable, or they don't feel like the classroom norm like supports their learning, like they're going to be less likely to communicate with each other about something as uncomfortable as math. So like I really want to focus on like the classroom norms, because they are the foundation for your whole class. And I want to see if I have intentional classroom norms, or if I revisit them periodically throughout the year, or if I have them be student generated ones, or if I look at my consistency of how strictly I follow and endorse them, like all that stuff, like does it ultimately like support student discussion in a positive or negative way?
So for my project, I want to focus on doing more, I want to focus on tasks in particular, because with my kids, they get really iffy about trying to work together, and their perseverance through problems is it's kind of rough. They give up super duper quick, and with it being algebra 2 right now, it's always interesting to try to come up with different tasks for them to do. And last year I really wanted to be able to get into some really rich tasks and be able to have them do some cool things. But SAT happened, and trying to get them to feel comfortable with math happened. And it was just like, it was a lot. So this year, I really want them to get better at being able to handle tasks, and then be able to go back to the rest of my department and then talk to them about also embedding different tasks into our curriculum, into our department, and trying to, just get the kids to be more comfortable. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to focus on. Like the perseverance aspect is really hard with students, like with like the problem solving skills and the perseverance without them like giving up too easily. So I think that's like a good topic to focus on. I feel like I still need to focus on that as well. But does anyone else have anything left that they want to say about the book, or are we all set?
I was just say it's super time consuming to go through that whole 5 practices process.
Yeah.
If you actually want to do it, like, it's almost unrealistic, but you want to sit before school and like anticipate solutions, and then walk around and monitor kids while they work, and then go through all the connecting and selecting and sequencing. Like I just feel like you just lost so much time for one day.
Yeah. And what are the repercussions for if you don't finish in an entire day? Do they just forget everything?
Right.
We don't close the lesson today, and then we try to do it tomorrow, and they forgot everything, and it's just.
How long are your guys' periods? Just to know. Like, how long is your class period?
Mine are an hour long.
Mine are 58.
Mine's 50.
I got 72 this year. Well, last year too.
Yay.
Yeah. So I do have the longer period, but that also is sometimes not beneficial because students lose interest about like halfway through. So like the juggling of time and pacing is such a hard thing with teaching. And like this book like focuses on, I feel like in a perfect classroom, like we could do all these things and they would be wonderful. But I feel like if we could even just take like one of the 5 practices and just like start incorporating it and just like work our way up, that would be like a positive step for us, because I feel like if we throw all of them in the same lesson and like expect it to be great, it's just like unrealistic expectations.
Yeah, no way.
That's like, Caitlin's like talking about having these awesome tasks, and it's like like in a perfect world, you would have an awesome task for every lesson, for every day, for every course, but like just that's not real.
No, not at all.
Like your goal is,
Especially with,
realistically have, one cool, awesome task maybe per week. And the other ones are going to be your run of the mill task.
Mhm. Like I'm doing good to get it into one class at this point. Like I didn't, with having 4 different preps this year, I did not like consider what planning would be like. And then on top of that with, grad school and then everything else, it's like you honestly do need a community to try to like do some of this stuff. And I just went to a PD with my department head the other day, and he was telling me how like he really wanted to do number talks and all this other stuff, but he himself didn't feel like the activities went well, so he just said, screw it, I'm done. And I'm like, well, maybe if we had somebody else in the class with you to monitor what you're doing and what the kids are doing and then debrief after, you wouldn't feel as bad, and that it would merit more conversation as to what should we be doing. He's like, yeah, that's a good idea. And I looked at him, I was like, I definitely suggested this last year, but it's okay, we should try this now.
Better late than never.
Yeah, like, it's a lesson study, no big deal. I threw it out there, but whatever.
All these new age young teacher practices. That's what my department calls them.
Like talking out the side of my neck, but whatever. But I definitely think for trying to incorporate things like this, you definitely need a community to bounce ideas off of, and to just, to be almost to hold yourself accountable for these things, and to have somebody come in and be like, hey, you did this really well, or I think we need to like work on XYZ.
Yeah, for sure. And like some of us may co-teach and stuff, and like I co-teach 2 classes, but teach by myself for 1. I find it always helpful to have like the extra person in the room just to even like check up on you, or just you could tell them like what you want them to look for, or tell you if you're doing those certain things. So yeah. I always prefer to just have someone in the room with me, just to, like have 2 bodies in the room. But I wasn't going to bring up number talks because that's like a whole nother book and a whole nother thing that I probably haven't done since Michigan State, but
yeah.
But are we all set? Any last words? No?
Good.
We're good?
We're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for having this book club discussion, guys.
Yes.
And we will
Thanks
keep
for
in
hosting,
touch.
Mackenzie.
No problem. All right. I will send the recording to Amy, and
Okay.
I hope that everything turned out okay.
Perfect.
Okay. Bye, guys.
Okay.
Bye. Have a good rest of the week.
You too.
You too.